It's a place to work, a place to talk, maybe tell a story or two. It's a place to tinker with belief and ask what's good and true. There are things to keep and things to toss or see them differently. You'll find us in the Soul's Garage. Come share a laugh or three. The Soul's Garage, the Soul's Garage. Whatever your model of faith, let's question, ponder, wonder why on any path you take.
Hello, and welcome to the Soul's Garage. I'm David Ezekiel.
And I'm Paris Donahue, and we've opened the garage door to hang out with you and tinker with this vehicle we call faith and that you call faith in order to keep it running smoothly in all of our lives.
And this is our third and final episode in a series that we've been calling Dubious Dogmas for Life's Dire Experiences.
Well, now, let's make it very plain that this is not the last episode of the Soul's Garage. That would break our listeners' hearts.
Both of them?
Yeah, both of them. It's just the end of this particular series, although there's a lot more dubious dogma out there that we're going to tackle sometime in the future. But for now, we're just dealing with the dubious dogma that applies to life's dire experiences.
Not to belabor the point, but if you've missed the previous episodes, we've been looking at the things people say when someone has been hurting. But what they say is about as welcome to the distressed person as a pork chop at a vegan buffet.
You know, sayings like God needed another angel in heaven, or everything happens for a reason, or God will never put more on you than you can stand. We've looked at those already.
Well, I just kind of thought you were going to do something about that that little image just hanging there about the pork chop at a vegan buffet. Don't you have a sign in your office or a picture that says something about that?
Yeah, it's a picture of a pig, and the pig is saying, "I turned vegetables into bacon. What's your superpower?"
Oh, well, I've ruined the moment. I just kind of left that hanging there, and I just thought you were going to deal with that. But anyhow. But, like we've said before, most people don't have malicious intent when they say these things, but they aren't exactly what a troubled person needs.
No, and most people are too nice to say, well, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard, or slap the person so hard their teeth smile at them from the other side of the room.
And let's just say right here that, sometimes we may make jokes about situations that occur, something that, is referred to as gallows humor. But that doesn't mean that we're making light of someone's pain. It's just sometimes when we make jokes that we are trying to deal with our own grief and our own pain. But we would never do anything or make light to an individual of their own issues, their own hurts, their own pains, because we've got enough to deal with rather than trying to figure out and wonder, what's being said, what's being communicated by this idiot that is trying to interject some more dubious dogma into my own life's dire circumstance.
Yeah, there used to be a radio personality in Atlanta that called himself Ludlow Porch, and he had people who would call into his show on a regular basis. He called them his wackos. And one of my favorites was...
You called in all the time,
I did call in.
Well, just to admit, full disclosure, I tried to call in a couple of times myself, and I never could get in.
Yeah, well, you just didn't know the right people. And one of the people that called in called himself Cyril Greenberg. He put on this kind of nasally voice. And Cyril Greenberg, the owner of the only drive-in funeral home in Forest Park, Georgia, that I know of. And he talked about how he'd installed a new drive-by viewing at the funeral home. He called it the peep and weep. And every once in a while, Ludlow would get somebody that would call him or send him a letter saying, that's just in bad taste. And Ludlow would always say, there's humor in most things, not all things, but there's humor in a lot of things, even sorrow, and that given time and distance, we can always, looking back on it, sometimes we can find the humor in it. Mm-hmm. I know when I was a hospice chaplain, you never heard so much gallows humor in your life at our team meetings because we dealt with so much sorrow all the time that it was a way to keep our sanity, to make light of it in some way. Mm-hmm. But we weren't laughing at the person. We're just trying to keep ourselves from crying.
Yeah. If someone's hurting, what is needed is a caring presence from someone else. In previous issues of our time here with you, our loyal, wonderful listeners,
both of them,
that great and vast multitude of them out there. We talked about Job, and one of the best things that Job's friends did when they initially came to be with him was they just sat there with Job in silence. And it was only when they started opening their mouth and to giving their own, well, this is the way that you have to look at it, that's when they got themselves into trouble. But sometimes, we take it even more than that, and we make this wonderful statement that says, I know how you feel.
Yeah, we talked about that one a little bit in the last session. And on the surface, of course, it may not sound like dubious dogma, but it is shot through with theological as well as psychological implications.
And it's often the case, to say, I know how you feel is just a deflection. It is saying that I am uncomfortable with your pain. So let's make this all about me.
Yeah, but enough about me. What do you think about me? Yeah, I remember years ago dealing with some folks in my church, and there was an aunt in the family who was not a part of the church that I served, who always seemed to be around whenever I showed up to work with the family. And she was a master at turning the conversation around to the day that her husband died. And it had not been recent either. It had been a while back, and she told, he died in my arms, and she'd just keep going and going and going. And she just amazing how the rest of the family was hurting about this other issue, but she had to turn it around to be about her. And it was not helpful, just not helpful.
They're just doing the one-upmanship element to it. If you go fishing, you say, somebody says, I caught a fish this big. And the next thing somebody says, well, I caught an even larger fish that was this big. And and it becomes a competitive sport. But in the world of hurting, it's not competitive. It's what is this person going through? If you think you're hurting, let me tell you about the time that.
I had to walk to school uphill both ways in the snow in North Georgia, of all places, without shoes on. That's real pain.
Paris, you're dating yourself, are you not? And saying how old you really are. I mean, at least I grew up in the rural sections of Alabama.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, but at least we had school buses.
We had school buses, but they didn't have enough money to keep the gas in them, so we had to walk and carry the school bus. Kind of like the Flintstones.
Well, if you think that's so bad, let me tell you about.
You see what we were doing there? Grief or sorrow is not a competitive sport. But so many people try to make it into one.
I had a love her to death. I had a cousin, and her husband died, and years and years later, she was doing the same thing. It was, oh, that's so terrible. Let me tell you about the time that my husband died. And oh, it's so terrible. You'll never get over it, because I still feel even more now than then. Or you know, I have kept the room that he died in exactly the same for the last 20 years. And you go, really? But it was all about her. She just could not get past it, or would not get past it. And what it did was it gave her a sense of knowing that, a validation, if you will, that her pain was unlike anyone else's pain, that her sorrow was unlike anyone else's sorrow. And she wanted any amount of sympathy, even that you might be receiving, that you needed and should be receiving, but she wanted it for herself.
Yeah. We readily admit that every experience is unique. Comparisons can be helpful if the wounded person asks for guidance, but usually that wounded person just wants somebody to be present with them, as we've said before, and simply acknowledge what they're going through.
Yeah, and sometimes, you can, it's not wrong to say, I was talking with a woman the other day, and she said, "Oh, my mother just died, and she was 97," and I said, "Oh, mine died, and she was 96," and I said, "And wasn't it wonderful that we got to have them for so long?" And then I extended, gave her the invitation to continue. But at least, I was trying to acknowledge that at least she had a fellow traveler, someone that is, journeying down the road. But I wasn't trying to mitigate her pain or anything to that effect. I was just trying to say, I at least can appreciate and understand a little bit, and that's all I'm going to say about it. And I didn't need to try and say, "Oh, well, your mother this and my mother that." No, it was just, yeah, I've traveled down this same dirt road, and it ain't fun. But however, I'm willing to travel with you if you need someone.
Yeah. It's amazing to me how often Jesus, that you find in the Gospels, was truly present with somebody. We often see Jesus seeing or hearing another person, sensing what they need from him in that particular moment. And in Matthew 25, Jesus says that his followers will be among those who do the very same thing. He said, says, "I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was lonely and you visited me," on and on like that. And half of them say, "When did we see you hungry, or when did we see you thirsty or lonely and do those things?" And he says, "Inasmuch as you have done it to the least of these, you've done it to me." And then he turns around and said, "I was hungry and you didn't give me anything to eat. I was thirsty and didn't give," and the other ones say, "Well, when did we see you and not do all those wonderful things? If we'd known it was you, we'd have done that." And he says, "Inasmuch as if you haven't done it to the least of these, you haven't done it to me." The point is that the whole idea is seeing the other person. Notice Jesus says, when they say, "When did we see you hungry or thirsty, or not see you?" That's the whole point. Jesus saw people, and that's one of the hardest things that I think we ever do.
Mm-hmm. Well, just think about this. When Jesus went to see Mary and Martha at the death of their brother Lazarus, that's over in John chapter 11.
Is that in the Old or the New Testament?
That's in the New Testament.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe it was penciled in the margins or something. Never mind. Carry on.
And and Jesus came and he was just with them. And it even says, Mary and Martha were distraught, and it even goes so far as to say Jesus wept too. Mm-hmm. He understood their pain and tragedy in this regard. And I'm not going to parse out the theological implications of all the nuances that are there, but just suffice it to say that Jesus, in that moment for Mary and Martha, was very, very present, because he saw them and he acknowledged their hurt, their pain, their loss. And basically he was saying, I see you.
Yeah. And so being present enough with another person to truly see that person and thereby see Jesus in them is what really counts. That's where the water hits the wheel. I love the story that Jim Wallace tells about a weekly grocery distribution center in Washington, D.C. that he used to help with. And it was run by this lady named Mary Glover. And before they would open their doors every time, she would lead them all in prayer. And she would always say, Lord, we know you'll be coming through this line today, so help us to treat you well.
That's a heck of a statement, isn't it?
Isn't it, though? I wish I'd said it.
But I have a feeling that you will.
I will. When better sermons are written, I'll preach it.
Hey, you heard him say that. You heard him say that. But there is a sense in which all of these statements that we've been making and about dubious dogmas and some of the jokes that we've been making about them, but there's a sense in which all of these statements buy into our culture's denial of death and sometimes even the denial of life. Think about, the medical industry, the fitness, entertainment, cosmetics, all of these industries want us to shy away from admitting that sorrow and death stalk us all. How many times have you seen that article or those articles that are written about, now, if you'll follow this type of diet, you will live to be as old as some of these people in the blue zones of the world, where they live 100 years, 104 years. And if we follow these diets and with medical technologies and advancements, we can help, we think, in the next 50 years to increase the lifespan of the people in the world from an average of about 80 years to about 150 years, or maybe even longer. Because we can put off death. But, death stalks us all.
Yeah. I know an insurance agent who every single time he would sit down with somebody to talk about a life insurance policy, he would start off with, well, just tell me what you think is the percentage that you're going to die. And always they would say, 75% or 80% or something like that. And then he would look at them and say, nope, it's 100%. It's one of the few things you can bank on. But our culture has fooled us into thinking that we can cheat it, or that it really doesn't matter, or if we just eat enough fiber, then it's then we can avoid it somehow or another. And the truth of the matter is that's not the case. I heard a joke. A fellow said, a man tried to sell me a coffin today. That's the last thing I need.
Well, I tell you, when it's my time to go, I kind of want to go like that country song. This is "Prop Me Up Beside the Jukebox When I Die." and put a mannequin beside me. Just remember, I like blondes, and put a stiff drink in my hand. Just prop me up beside the jukebox when I die.
That's a great way to go.
Well, and there's always. Oh, never mind. I won't go down that path.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm not either. There's a joke about a man who came home from playing golf one day, and his wife said, "Gosh, it took you so long to get home. What is everything okay?" And he says, "No, it's not. We were playing with our foursome, and Charlie had a heart attack and died right there on the golf course." She said, "Oh, that's terrible. And it took you so long to get home because you had to call the ambulance and stuff." And he says, No, the rest of the game was we hit the ball, drag Charlie, hit the ball, drag Charlie." It's the whole thing about, denying death. Well, yeah, okay, Charlie's dead. We'll deal with that later. We got to finish this golf game now.
Yeah. And and as a pastor, I can tell you of the number of times that someone has come and has just admitted that the death of their loved one was just a total inconvenience.
Yeah, yeah.
And I won't go into those stories, but but in our experience, faith is not a detour around pain, and it's not a rescue from it either.
No, it's not.
It's a comforting presence as we travel through pain, and it gives to everyone the recognition that yes, that what is going on in your world has rocked you hard, but at the same time, just remember that there are those of us who have traveled down this road as well, and we're traveling with it, with you, and traveling down this road in fuller recognition that there is something more out there, that there's something more beyond us.
Right. I love the line from the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians, where he says, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope."
Now, I like the language in the King James Version.
I knew you were going to bring that
up. Especially the first line in that verse where it says, "Now I would not have you ignorant, brethren,"
and then you put the comma in a different place, and it comes out, "I would not have you ignorant, brethren."
But I digress.
Yes, you do digress.
But the whole aspect is that you do not grieve as others who do not have any hope.
Yeah. Notice he doesn't say so that you may not grieve. He knows you're going to grieve, not just death, but, divorce, any kind of loss. Lots of things make us grieve. And faith does not rescue us from the grief. Grief is an inescapable part of life. But as the text says, when we grieve, we can grieve with hope.
Yeah, because there's always more living, even joyful living, that's available to us on the other side of pain. It's the difference between the presumption of despair that says, "I have no hope," versus the resounding singing of Amazing Grace.
Yeah, that actually happened to me as a hospice chaplain. I was talking to a lady who's just had, she was just down on the whole process and so angry, and so I said, "Well, tell me something you're hoping for." And she snapped at me and said, "Hope? I have no hope." And so I knew what my work was at that point, that I had it cut out for me. And either that same day or the day after, I can't remember which now, I went to visit a lady who was just so sweet and lying in her hospital bed there in her house. And I said to her at one point, I said, "For some reason, I think you must be one of those people who likes to sing." And she said, "Oh, I love to sing." I said, "What's your favorite hymn?" She said, "Amazing Grace."
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And so we sat by her bedside and we sang Amazing Grace. And the night she died, the family called me and asked me to come to the house. and big, huge family. And we all made a circle around her bed. The body had not even been picked up yet. And we all held hands and sang Amazing Grace. It's one of the highlights of my career, that moment, in celebrating her attitude and her faith that she was grieving. She didn't want to go, but she had hope. And that was what made the difference.
You know, one of my friends, when his mother died, he and his siblings gathered around their mother's bed, and they all sat there and they read the scriptures together, and they were all singing, and finally, his mother ebbed off into life after life. And Stan said that was really one of the most powerful moments in his entire life. You know, to affirm the faith, you know, in that way. You know, as we say that there is both tears and joy that occurs at someone's transitioning at that moment.
Yeah, one of my favorite characters in church history, I'm a church history nerd, is Martin Luther. I had the privilege of visiting Wittenberg a couple of years ago and going to his house. But one of Luther and his wife Catherine's children was a girl named Magdalena, and she got very ill and died, and I think she was like a teenager or something. And at her funeral, Martin Luther said, "How strange it is to know that she is at peace and all is well, and yet to be so sorrowful." That just encapsulates it all to me.
Yeah, that's very powerful.
And
that's great.
Yeah.
And didn't you? You told me something about some guy that you knew who said something about hellos and goodbyes.
Oh, it's Charles Poole.
Uh-huh.
In one of his books, he says, in the entire history of the world, there has never been a hello that wasn't carrying a goodbye in its back pocket, meaning that anybody we have ever known, someday there's going to come a time when we say goodbye, whether it's a death, whether it's moving, it could be all kinds of things. So there's never been a hello that wasn't carrying a goodbye in its back pocket. But then he goes on to say, but the joy of a hello that matters is worth the pain of a goodbye that hurts.
That's a great line. Say that again.
Yeah, the joy of a hello that matters is worth the pain of a goodbye that hurts.
Wow.
Yeah. Would you, the way to avoid this pain that you're in would have been not to have known the person at all.
That's true.
But
yeah.
would you have wanted that? No. The joy of that hello that matters is worth the pain of going through a goodbye that hurts.
And so I think that the the lesson, I think I'm starting to hear Mama
right, yeah.
rattling around.
Thus endeth the lesson. So the point is, we don't want anybody to drop anchor in grief. That never solves anything, because despair is the ultimate presumption in life. Despair says, I don't believe that there's anything God can do with this pain that I've got that could make it redeemable, that could even get me through it. God can't teach me anything. God can't teach somebody else something. There are all kinds of possibilities. I heard it said by a fellow named John Claypool that the real tragedy of the story of Judas in the New Testament is that Judas checked out, that he committed suicide before he saw what God could do with the mistake that he had made. In other words, changing the whole world through Jesus and through Jesus' resurrection. So that's why we say despair is the ultimate presumption.
And to stay in that aspect of despair says that I choose not to enjoy the moments that I had and allow them to be life affirming and life giving, that I'm seeing that the despair just suck the life out of me. And the sad thing is, you wind up trying to suck the life out of someone else, and rather than saying, life and what I've had has been a gift. Learning also from Claypool in that regard, that life is a gift, and that in this aspect, that if you look at the hello and the goodbye as a gift, as never been yours to own anyway, but yours to treasure and to give sense to who you are, and to give value to who you are, so that you can give value to someone else and affirm the gift that had been a part of their life, and now that for someone else that it's gone. That truly is despair is self-destructive and destructive to others as well. But life-affirming gift is gives life and more life to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we'll be the first to admit that this is not something you can just do on the spur of the moment. On the count of three, I'm over my grief. No, it doesn't happen that way. There's a sense in which we take our pain and our sorrow with us. But it's the whole idea of that I can choose every day to face into life rather than face behind me with the sorrow that I've been through.
You can't just go through the stages of grief and say, okay, this stage is over with, now on to the next one.
Right.
It's very fluid, and it flows from one to the other and sometimes back and forth.
Yeah.
Okay, Mama.
All right, we hear you.
Mama's calling, folks, and she's calling us into the house for dinner. So I guess it's time to close the garage door and head inside.
Yeah. So until next time, I'm Paris Donahue.
And I'm David Ezekiel. And we'll see you soon again here at the Soul's Garage. The Soul's Garage was recorded by David Ezekiel and mostly written by Paris Donahue.
Our theme song was written by Adam and Brady Beard and a little bit by me.
Hey, and Adam and Brady Beard did a good job of performing and recording the music for us.
And Nancy Art did a great job of designing our cover art.
And we're appreciative of our Director of Custodial Services, Dwayne Pipe.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram and maybe TikTok, I guess, if Elon figures out what he's going to do with it, or whichever social media outlet wastes the most time for you.
And let's face it, time spent with us is never wasted.
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you?
Of course so. That's why I said it. Send your comments to us at thesoulsgarage@gmail.com, or send it in a stamped self-addressed envelope with your comments written on the back of. I'd prefer a $100 bill this go around.
But we'll take 50s.
But we'll take 50s.
Sure. Soul's Garage is a production of Two Old Geezers Studio.
And we certainly act like it sometimes.